The sun streamed softly through the hotel windows as I stood in front of the mirror, dressed in ivory silk, my heart light with anticipation. Today was meant to be the happiest day of my life. My mother stood behind me, adjusting the back of my gown with her worn, gentle hands. She looked radiant in a pale lavender dress, simple, unbranded, but filled with grace. The way she smiled at me, her eyes filled with pride, made everything feel complete. I remembered how she worked 2 jobs just to help pay for this wedding. She'd sold her gold bangles, the last gift from my late father, to help me book the venue. But she never complained. She just smiled and told me, "You deserve magic." The guests were arriving. The ballroom shimmered with candlelight, floral arrangements, and chatter. My fiancé's family, polished, loud, and always judging, made their grand entrance. His mother's eyes scanned my mother from head to toe, and then the whispers began. I turned slightly as I heard one of the aunts laugh softly and say to another guest, "That's not a mother. That's a mistake in a gown." The words hit me like ice water. My breath caught in my chest. I looked toward my fiancé, expecting outrage, or at least discomfort. But instead, he chuckled. A casual, dismissive laugh, like her dignity meant nothing. My world shifted in that moment. I stood frozen. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the music playing. This wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. And something inside me, something quiet, something fierce, began to awaken. I looked at my mother. She hadn't heard the words, but she could feel the shift in the room. Her hands nervously straightened her gown. I had spent years building a life of independence and grace, and the very people I was about to join had torn down the one person who made that possible. A decision was forming in my chest, and when it came, it would echo louder than any insult ever whispered. I stood at the edge of the aisle, my bouquet trembling slightly in my hand. All 204 guests sat in expectant silence, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Rows of perfectly dressed people, friends, colleagues, strangers in glittering attire, none of them knowing that the wedding they came to witness was about to turn into something else entirely. My eyes scanned the room. I saw cameras being adjusted, the officiant flipping through pages, the groom whispering something to his groomsmen, smirking like nothing had happened. But I hadn't forgotten. In that moment, memories came flooding back. I saw my mother in her janitor uniform, quietly wiping floors in a cold hospital corridor so I could attend school. I saw her hands, blistered from sewing dresses late into the night. I remembered the night she went without dinner, pretending she wasn't hungry so I could eat. Also, I could stand here, in this moment, in this white gown, with dignity. And they had mocked her. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the microphone meant for our vows. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor. The room fell still. "Thank you all for coming," I began. My voice didn't shake. "Thank you for traveling, for dressing up, for honoring what was supposed to be a celebration." There was a pause. I saw the groom's smile falter slightly. "But I can't go through with this wedding," I said. Gasps echoed like fireworks. A wave of disbelief swept through the crowd. Murmurs broke out. Phones lowered. I turned to look at my mother. Her eyes widened in confusion. Her lips trembled. Then, slowly, tears welled up and rolled down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but something deeper. I walked over to her, gently took her hand, and turned back to face the room. My mother raised me with dignity, with sacrifice, and with love that asked for nothing in return. I said, voice steady, "If anyone here thinks she's an embarrassment, then they've never known real beauty." And with that, I walked away. Together, my mother and I moved through the aisle, not ashamed, not broken. My gown trailing behind me like a flag, her hand in mine, our heads held high. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. My mother sat at the edge of the couch, wringing her hands, her eyes swollen from crying. Her lavender gown, now slightly wrinkled from the day's events, still clung to her with quiet dignity. The silence was heavy, the kind that settled deep in your chest. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered, barely meeting my eyes. "I ruined it for you." I knelt beside her, gently taking her hands into mine. "No, Mama. I said. You didn't ruin anything. You gave me clarity. She tried to smile but failed. Her strength had carried me my whole life. Tonight, I needed mine to carry her. I wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, made her tea, and helped her to bed. But sleep wouldn't come to me. I sat at my small desk in the corner of the room. The glow from the laptop lit up the darkness. My reflection stayed back at me in the black screen for a moment, eyes still lined with makeup, soul raw but alert. I opened a blank page and began to type. The words came naturally, honest, simple, unfiltered. They mocked my mother at my wedding. Here's what I did next. I poured everything into that post, not out of revenge, but truth. I wrote about how she had raised me with her hands, her back, and her silence. About how that gown she wore wasn't from a boutique, but from weeks of careful savings, skipped meals, and hours at a sewing machine. I wrote not to gain pity, but to give honor. Then I attached the photo I'd taken of her earlier that morning, standing proud in her dress, her eyes beaming as she adjusted my veil. I added one line beneath it. That gown cost a week's worth of love. I hovered over the post button for just a second. Then I clicked, and with that, I closed the laptop and exhaled. Whatever happened next, the world would now see her as I always had, not as an embarrassment in a gown, but as the most beautiful woman in the room. By morning, my phone was on fire. The notification chimes buzzed non-stop. Emails, DMs, mentions, retweets. What had started as a deeply personal act had rippled into something far larger than me. The post, just a few hundred honest words and a single photo of my mother, had gone viral. Wildly, uncontrollably viral. Celebrities reposted it with captions like "This is real elegance," and her silence was powerful, but her walkout was louder. Influencers stitched their reactions, many with tears in their eyes, calling it the classiest MIC drop in history. The comments section flooded with stories from daughters who saw their own mothers in mine, quiet, hard-working women who had never been given the respect they deserved. But it didn't stop there. A popular women-led podcast sent me a message. "We'd be honored to have you share your story." Within hours, I was on a Zoom call recording an episode titled, "Not the Bride They Expected." I talked about dignity, respect, and the danger of staying silent when silence becomes complicity. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The internet was already doing the math. That afternoon, a woman from a socially conscious fashion brand emailed me. She said, "We love your voice. We'd like to collaborate on a campaign celebrating real women and their stories. Are you interested in designing a capsule line?" Me? Design? But as I read her words, a quiet seed of possibility took root. Meanwhile, the storm was hitting the other side of the aisle, hard. My ex-fiancé's family, the Iwobi clan, owned a high-end fashion house, one known for luxury, exclusivity, and snob appeal. The kind that prided itself on aesthetic lineage and timeless heritage. Well, now their name was trending, not for couture, but for cruelty. Netizens went digging. Old interviews resurfaced, one where the groom's mother said, "Not everyone is cut out to wear our designs. We cater to women of taste." Another clip showed their fashion show where only fair-skinned models walked the runway, something no one questioned until now. The backlash was swift and unrelenting. Former interns spoke up about how they were treated like shadows. Photos of extravagant parties thrown during staff layoffs began circulating. Hashtags emerged. #elegance is grace and #not in that gown. Memes flew. Think pieces were published. And still, I said nothing. No interviews beyond the podcast. No drama. No call-outs. Just one post. The truth, once spoken with courage, had done all the speaking I needed. And somewhere in the heart of that digital storm, a quiet form of vengeance began, not with fire or fury, but with facts, dignity, and a mother's love that could no longer be mocked in silence. It started with a single placard. A young woman stood outside the flagship store of Iwobi Luxe wearing a thrift wedding dress and holding a cardboard sign that read, "Elegance isn't cruelty." A few passers-by stopped to snap pictures. Within hours, others joined her. Former interns, stylists, and everyday women who had once felt excluded or belittled by the brand's culture stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding up photos of their mothers, others quoting my post. The protests spread like wildfire, igniting in front of Iwobi Luxe boutiques across 3 cities. The message was simple. Fashion isn't just about fabric, it's about values. News vans parked along the sidewalks. Reporters interviewed tearful ex-employees. They told me I was too dark for their brand image, said one. I was paid less than minimum wage for 14-hour shifts, said another. Someone else shared emails from HR dismissing complaints about verbal abuse as industry toughness. The house of Iwobi wasn't just burning, it was being unstitched thread by thread. On social media, consumers began organizing mass returns. Videos emerged of women tossing Iwobi gowns into donation bins or cutting up tags in slow motion. The luxury that once symbolized prestige now screamed arrogance and exclusion. Major retailers took notice. One by one, high-end department stores issued statements. We stand for inclusive fashion. Effective immediately, we are suspending all future orders from Iwobi Luxe. Online platforms pulled listings. Fashion bloggers who once praised their seasonal lines now distance themselves with apology videos and reaction clips titled, "Why I'll Never Wear Iwobi Again." Even brand ambassadors began backing out, one stating, "I wore their gowns, but I never knew what they stood for until now. I refused to be the face of silent cruelty." And through it all, I remained silent. No interviews, no rebuttals, no smug tweets. I turned down every morning show request, declined every magazine cover, politely refused book deal offers that came faster than I could read them. I posted nothing but one black and white image of my mother smiling in her gown. The same photo from the wedding, now recaptioned. Still standing, still stunning. The silence wasn't avoidance. It was strategy. Let the truth speak. Let their actions be weighed. Let the world decide. And the world was loud. The very people who once believed they were untouchable, insulated by money, status, and silk, were now being held accountable not by courts, but by conscience. One whisper had mocked my mother. Now the entire industry was listening to her silence, and realizing it had always spoken louder than luxury ever could. The message came late in the evening, a long, rambling text filled with apologies, half-formed excuses, and the faint scent of desperation. My ex-fiancé had finally reached out. He wrote about how sorry he was, how everything had gotten out of hand. He said he didn't mean to laugh, that he was nervous, that the pressure from his parents had been overwhelming. "Can we talk?" he ended. "Just one chance. In person." I stayed at the screen for a while before replying. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Garden Terrace Cafe. Public." When I arrived, he was already there, a shadow of the man I almost married. No tailored suit today, just a wrinkled shirt, bags under his eyes, and a forced smile that trembled. He stood up awkwardly, pulling out a chair for me. "I've missed you," he said softly. "I've been going crazy." I didn't respond. I let the silence hang, like glass between us. "I know I messed up," he continued. "I shouldn't have laughed. I was caught off guard. It wasn't about your mom. It was the pressure. You know how my parents are." I raised an eyebrow, still quiet. He leaned forward, voice lower now. "The post. Could you take it down? Or just change the caption. It's killing our brand. My parents are talking about liquidating my career." There it was, the truth beneath the regret. I took a sip of my tea and then finally looked him in the eyes. "You laugh when they insulted the woman who raised me. You didn't flinch. You didn't defend. You didn't even check if I was okay." He opened his mouth to speak, but I kept going. You know what's louder than that laugh now? The world hearing it, over and over, on repeat, and not one part of me is sorry for letting them listen. I stood up, smoothing my coat. "You wanted to build an empire of elegance. Turns out, elegance starts with decency. And you never had that." He didn't follow me, didn't call my name. As I walked away, I felt nothing but clarity, the kind that doesn't need revenge to feel powerful. Just truth and a quiet goodbye. It began with a single sketch on a notepad, a swirl of soft lines, a silhouette that whispered strength instead of shouting status. I didn't plan to become a designer. But after everything, the wedding, the post, the storm that followed, I knew I wanted to create something that could last beyond the noise. Something that honored the woman whose love had stitched my life together. That's how Grace in Gowns was born. I worked quietly at first, sketching between interviews and sponsorship calls. I gathered a small team, mostly women I knew from the neighborhood, tailors who'd worked behind the scenes of bigger names without ever getting credit. We sat around my mother's dining table, turning my ideas into fabric and fabric into form. Our first design was simple, a flowing, lilac-colored gown with hand-finished hems and pockets deep enough to carry more than just lipstick. We named it Mama's Worth. The tag on the inside read, "Elegance is earned, not inherited." I posted the launch quietly on my social media, with just one image, my mother standing tall in the gown, looking away from the camera, sunlight catching her hair. No filters, no flashy edits, just her, just truth. Within 24 hours, it sold out. Emails poured in, "When's the restock?" I've never felt seen like this before. This reminds me of my mother. We scaled fast, but with care. I refused to let it become a brand that forgot its roots. Every piece was named after a woman's story. The backbone, midnight breadwinner, first light. Each one came with a tag that carried not a price, but a purpose. A percentage of every sale went to shelters for domestic abuse survivors and scholarships for daughters of single mothers. And I made sure no one on my team earned less than they deserved, even the seamstresses who never saw the front page. My mother never wanted to be in the spotlight, but she became the quiet face of the brand, not in billboards, but in the spirit of every design. Women from all walks of life sent us photos, wearing her gown to interviews, birthdays, even court dates, moments where they needed to feel strong. And for the first time in a long while, I watched my mother glow, not just in fabric, but in the knowledge that she had not only raised a daughter, she had inspired a movement. Grace in Gowns was never just about clothes. It was about reclaiming dignity, about honoring the quiet warriors, about reminding the world that true elegance begins with respect. And it all started with a gown they once dared to mock. The headlines came in quietly at first, small, almost polite notices in fashion newsletters and trade reports. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Iwobi Luxe faces major losses amid ongoing backlash. Luxury label loses final retail partner. Silence was her weapon, and it worked. The empire that once draped red carpets and ruled exclusive fashion circles was unraveling, and this time, no amount of stitching could save it. Their flagship store in London shut its doors overnight. In New York, the lights at their Fifth Avenue boutique dimmed one last time. Retail giants that had once begged to carry Iwobi designs now raced to distance themselves. Press releases used words like values misalignment and public trust. But everyone knew what it meant. The public had spoken, and no couture label, no matter how rich or royal, was bigger than conscience. Inside their headquarters, the storm turned inward. The board of directors, once loyal, once complicit, convened behind closed doors. With profits plummeting, partnerships dissolved, and investor confidence shattered, the Iwobis were voted out of their own company. Not just suspended, expelled. The groom's father, once seen as the visionary, left the office without a word, escorted by security. His mother tried to issue a statement about regrettable misunderstandings, but the world had already heard enough. No one bought it, literally or figuratively. And as for my ex-fiancé, his name began trending again, not because he'd launched something or said something brilliant, but because of a meme, a split-screen image. On one side, me walking away from the altar, holding my mother's hand. On the other, him standing alone in a dark office, staring at a stack of foreclosure notices. The caption, "He laughed and lost everything." Another one read, "The empire collapsed, and she never raised her voice." He tried to push back, issuing a live video filled with tears and apologies, claiming he never intended harm. But intent didn't matter anymore. The damage wasn't done by a single laugh. It was the years behind it, the brand built on exclusion, and the silence that followed. I didn't respond. I didn't post. I didn't need to. The world had become its own jury, and in its ruling, it didn't scream or fight. It simply walked away, just as I had on that wedding day. Iwobi Lux filed for bankruptcy 2 months later. The once glamorous name that had decorated glossy magazines and Fashion Week banners now collected dust in bankruptcy court filings and social media archives. And as they faded into obscurity, one truth remained. Sometimes, the loudest revenge is a woman who chooses grace over chaos and lets silence pull down the pillars of arrogance. The studio lights were warm on my skin, but I wasn't nervous. Not this time. Across from me sat the host, polished, respected, a woman who had seen it all. She smiled gently, holding a note card in her hand, though we both knew this story didn't need prompts. Millions have followed your journey, she began. But the question everyone keeps asking is, what gave you the strength? I paused for a moment, breathing in. It was never about strength, I said quietly. It was about love and dignity. My mother gave up her dreams so I could have mine. She scrubbed the floors other people walked on, sewed clothes she could never afford to wear. And yet, she never once asked for anything but my happiness. That kind of love, it deserves to be honored, not mocked. The host's eyes glistened. When you stood up that day, did you know what would happen? I shook my head. No, I didn't have a plan. I just knew that silence would cost me more than any wedding ever could. And I couldn't let my silence tell my mother she was less than she is. Behind me, the screen lit up. The image filled the frame. My mother at the wedding, standing proudly in her lavender gown. Her hands folded, her face calm. Strong, regal. The audience gasped softly. She wore that dress with pride. I continued, glancing over my shoulder. People laughed at her, but they didn't know what it cost, not just in money, but in meaning. That gown wasn't fashion. It was sacrifice. There was a stillness in the room that felt sacred. The host leaned forward. And now, the world wears your brand. The same world that once judged you. How does that feel? I smiled gently. It's not about the brand. It's about the message. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to match their status to rise above them. Sometimes, walking away is the loudest thing you will ever do. The audience stood to their feet. Applause thundered. Some wiped away tears. And in that moment, under studio lights, with my mother's image shining behind me, I knew we had reclaimed something deeper than a name. We had redefined what elegance truly meant. 1 year later, the ballroom looked very different. No towering ice sculptures. No gold-foiled invitation cards. No elitist dress codes. Instead, there was warmth, golden lights strung across the ceiling, soft music floating through the air, and women from every walk of life stepping into the room with confidence. It was the inaugural charity gala for A Gown for Every Mother, an evening dedicated to honoring the unsung heroines who had sacrificed, endured, and loved without applause. I watched from the wings as the room filled with laughter and clinking glasses. There were teachers, nurses, janitors, seamstresses, waitresses, single mothers who had been nominated from across the country, flown in, dressed by our team in custom gowns inspired by their stories. No two were alike. Each dress carried its own name and message. The Dawn, Survivor's Silk. The Second Job, Still Standing. These women walked the red carpet not as accessories to someone else's success, but as the stars of their own journeys. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. The music softened. The lights dimmed slightly. A spotlight landed at the entrance. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Cameras shifted. And then, slowly, gracefully, my mother stepped forward. She walked the carpet in a gown we named the Original Thread. A deep lavender creation, reimagined from the one she wore to my wedding. But richer, fuller, embroidered with tiny silver words stitched across the hem. Love woven quietly. This time, there were no whispers, only applause. Some guests stood as she passed. Others clapped softly, hands to their hearts. She gave them a gentle smile, humble, as always. But this time, her chin didn't tremble. Her shoulders didn't shrink. She wasn't blending into the background. She was the background, the foundation, the beginning of it all. I joined her at the end of the carpet, holding her hand. We stood beneath a banner that read, "Elegance is in the story, not the price." Together, we stepped onto the stage. I gave a short speech about gratitude, resilience, and why every mother, no matter her circumstance, deserves to feel seen, deserves to feel celebrated, deserves to feel beautiful. The night ended with dancing, storytelling, and a silent auction that raised enough money to fund grants for hundreds of women starting new lives. As we walked out of the ballroom later that evening, I looked at my mother and whispered, "Do you remember what they said about your gown?" She nodded slightly, smiling, and I said, just loud enough for the cameras to hear. "They mocked the gown. We turned it into a crown."